Good evening and welcome to this public forum with the candidates for the United States Congress, Pam Gullison and Kevin Kramer. I am Anessa Pfeiffer-Johnson with the League of Women Voters, and I will be your moderator this evening. This candidate debate has been organized by the League of Women Voters of Bismarck-Mandan and is co-sponsored by Dakota Media Access and the Bismarck Tribune. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes the informed participation of all citizens in their government. The League does not endorse or oppose candidates or their political parties. This is intended to be a respectful exchange of ideas. Our purpose this evening is to inform voters with information about the candidates and their positions on issues that affect the people of North Dakota. The audience here tonight is asked to reserve applause or other comments until after the forum has ended. Tonight's debate format is as follows. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. Candidates are asked to comply with our time restrictions so we can get to as many questions as possible. Our timer will let you know when you're down to 30 seconds, then 10 seconds, then stop. Following responses to the question for both candidates, we invite them to engage in a dialogue about the issue raised in the previous question for no more than 3 minutes. The first person to have answered the previous question will begin the crosstalk. Now, let's get to know our candidates. Each of you will have 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us why you are seeking election to the United States Congress. Mr. Kramer.
Thank you, Anessa, for lending your skills. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this forum. Thank you to all of you for whom this is really the most important. You're the voters. Democracy demands involvement, and the irrevocable gift of your time this evening demonstrates just how important democracy is to all of you. I want to also introduce my wife, Chris, who is with me. She is my partner and the mother of all 5 of our children, who range in age from 31 to 5. And Chris and I became grandparents a couple of months ago, and that's really probably what I want to focus on the most tonight in answering all of the questions, is not just my generation or the generations ahead of me, but the generations behind us. I also want to say thank you and acknowledge my predecessor in public life, Jim Fugely, who's with us tonight. He was my predecessor at the Department of Tourism as the director, and he built, I often say, Jim, to all the marketing classes now that I teach at the university, that it was Jim Fugely who built the first real tourism department, and it was after that that we've all just been enjoying building on your success since then. I think they're doing a great job now, but it's good to be with you tonight as well. I also want to thank Pam. This is our 3rd time together, and we're not even halfway done. Pam and I have agreed to be together at several forums and debates, and I think it's a testament to, first of all, the incredible access that we have in North Dakota to public officials and candidates for office. It's a blessing not only for the voters, but it's a blessing for us as well. Because when you rob yourself of that opportunity, you not only rob the voter of the opportunity to have a say in democracy, but you rob the public official of the wisdom of the voter. So I look forward to a rigorous debate tonight, but a respectful one, and that's as you said, and we've had a couple of them to this point, and I expect they'll continue that. So thank you again for the evening. I look forward to the continued debate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kramer. And Ms. Gullison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thanks to the League of Women Voters, everybody who had a part in putting this together tonight. I appreciate it greatly. I think that debates are important. You get to hear directly from us on our views on these issues, where we stand, and more importantly, how we want to help solve them. It's one of the reasons I've been traveling all over the state of North Dakota. I've been to over 80 communities since I started this campaign, reaching out, talking to North Dakotans about what's important to them. That's been a really important time for me. And I so appreciate them taking the time to share their thoughts with me. My husband Bill and I farm and ranch in Sargent County. We farm with our 3 sons, Lance, Cody, and Cameron. They're the 5th generation of Gullisons to be farming in Sargent County. We feel so incredibly blessed to be working side by side with them each and every day. My husband Bill is here. He's back there in about the 3rd row. Frankly, we're in the middle of corn harvest, and I'm surprised he's here with me tonight. But it just shows how much he supports me. I've been a farmer and a rancher all my life. I grew up on a dairy farm. I know a lot about hard work, and I know how to get things done. It's one of the reasons I'm running for Congress. We have such big challenges in front of us, and we need to start facing them. We need to reduce our deficit. We need to get our spending under control. We need to balance our budgets. Our senior citizens need us to come together to start working to solve the big problems regarding Social Security and Medicare. And we need to pass a farm bill. We need to get this country on track for energy independence, and we need to do it right here by focusing on our domestic energy production. And we need to get people back to work again in this country. We need to focus on jobs, and we need to remember that Made in America needs to matter again. That's some of all the reasons I'm running. There are so much more. These are big, big challenges our country faces, and the only way we're going to do it is by coming together, working together, setting aside the partisanship, and get on task to be able to solve these big, big challenges for our country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the questions developed by the members of the League of Women Voters and the Bismarck Tribune. It is to note that the candidates have not been given copies of the questions before tonight. First question. Mr. Kramer, Congress left much work to be done. What one chamber approved, the other would not consider, with few exceptions. If elected, what would you push Congress to accomplish in the first 100 days after new Senate and House members are sworn in? Realistically, what would you hope to accomplish for our country in the first 100 days?
Thank you, and that's a great question. Some of it will depend on whether or not we really do face sequestration. So I'm going to, for a moment, for the purposes of this question, assume that lame duck Congress is going to deal with some of that, and we're going to start fresh. I think one of the first things I want to do is to get in there and start reining in the overburdensome regulations that are being forced on our businesses, on our families, on our farmers by several agencies. We can begin with the Environmental Protection Agency, one that I see coming at us every single day from my 12th floor office in the Capitol building. We are on a track right now to seeing a federalization of regulations that belong with the states. And we need to, first of all, stop what's going on now, rein it back, and make sure that we can bring federal regulation back where it belongs to the people that live with the consequences of the regulations. So one of my very first things I'd want to do is to pass legislation, much of that legislation, as you said, that has passed the House, and get it back up into a bipartisan debate and discussion, and see if we can't reach across the aisle to our friends on the other side and the friends in the other chamber and the administration and start getting some reasonable compromise and passing some of these bills that will rein in the regulations, free up the states to regulate as they ought to, and then unleash the entrepreneurial spirit that I know is waiting to be unleashed in this country.
Thank you. Ms. Gullickson.
Well, I'd get right to work on the Farm Bill. I'd pass a farm bill. I'd work on both sides of the aisle, to those urban members of the House who don't understand it, to the leadership in the House side who chooses not to pass it. I'd work very hard to bring people together, and I'd pass a farm bill. Second, I'd start working on jobs. This country needs more jobs. We need to grow the economy. There's no better example than what we're doing right here in North Dakota on energy development. These are real jobs. I'd pass a production tax credit. Just yesterday, we learned that 350 people are getting a pink slip because they're losing their jobs in Grand Forks because of the lack of passing a production tax credit. Those are just some of the things. My opponent and I disagree on that. He doesn't support the production tax credit. I think it has to be part of our all of the above energy strategy. And as I said before, these are real jobs. This is what puts Americans back to work, and it's good for this country.
Mr. Kramer.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when my opponent refers to the production tax credit, that's the production tax credit on wind development, and it's a credit. It's 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour that's paid for every kilowatt hour that is created by wind development. We've invested heavily in this country and in this state. I've overseen, 1,500 megawatts of nameplate capacity, wind capacity in this state. But we have a $16 trillion debt. And while it's okay to invest in early emerging technologies, and we're seeing the advancements of some of those technologies, the early wind turbines that I cited were half a megawatt, the new ones are 3 megawatt. We're seeing advancements. But we can't afford a $16 trillion debt and to continue to subsidize forms of energy when we have other forms. We are blessed in North Dakota. We have the lowest electricity rates in the country. We have the lowest natural gas rates in the country, giving us a competitive advantage in the global marketplace, not the least of which is the incredible wealth that's created by the fossil fuel industry in this state. So let's not pick the winners and losers with public policy and tax policy and incentives, but rather let's unleash the free market and let the decision makers be the consumers. We can do that, but we have to deal with this debt, and passing more subsidies doesn't deal very well with the debt.
One of the best ways to deal with the debt is to get people back working again, grow the economy. That's how we bring more taxes into the tax base. And this is one perfect example, something we do so well in this state. We're the Saudi Arabia of wind. We have all the potential in the world. And we have an industry, a wind industry, that has really just gotten on their feet. We need to give them more long-term certainty. That's the kind of investments, that's the kind of smart investments that we can do as a country. Because again, it meets our overall goal. It reduces our dependence on foreign oil and other sources of energy. It allows us to do more with renewables, and it gives certainty to a very strong industry.
Do either of you have questions for the other?
Well, I would have a question. First of all, how does wind energy diminish our dependency on foreign oil? And secondly, if it's such a strong industry, why does it require a subsidy from the taxpayers to keep vibrant?
Well, let me address maybe the second one first. We've given long-term tax certainty to the oil companies. We've given it to coal industry. Those things are there long-term, and I don't dispute that. I think they should be there. I support that. I think it meets our overall goal. And with regards to wind, it's one more component for our overall energy portfolio. It is so important. It allows us to focus more on what we're producing here as a nation and not be reliant. It's one part of it. What we've learned now is that where we used to be about 60% dependent on foreign oil, we're now down to about 42%. So we're making progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is time. You get the next question, Ms. Gullickson. What, if anything, do you think should be done about the fiscal cliff of budget cuts and tax increases that face the nation in January? For what specific areas of the budget would you propose or support changes on the revenue side, expense side, or both?
Well, the fiscal cliff is a real problem. We've got to start addressing the debt in this country. We've got to start growing the economy. That has to be a combination of both. I would start by looking at this. We're spending $3 for every $2 we take in. We're borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar from foreign countries, countries that we're competing with directly. We can't continue that. So my solution is we need to ask every single agency to come forward with reduced budget. We are going to require it of them. It has to be part of their responsibility to help us rein in what we know is out-of-control spending. And we do that by asking, I think, a 5% across-the-board cut. And it's not going to be easy. We know that. But we have a good example, what we saw just happen on the Senate side with regards to the Farm Bill. That was a bipartisan effort. Our two senators, Conrad and Hoeven, led the effort. They identified 9% in cuts in that budget. So it can be done, and that's how we need to start.
Mr. Kramer, would you like me to repeat the question?
Please.
What, if anything, do you think should be done about the fiscal cliff of budget cuts and tax increases that face our nation in January? For what specific areas of the budget would you propose or support changes on the revenue side, expense side, or both?
Well, first of all, I think it's difficult to ask every agency to come in with a budget cut, but then propose a subsidy like the production tax credit in wind. I think this is going to require some sacrifice. First thing I would do is roll back the federal budget to 2008, before stimulus, before Obamacare, before TARP, before the bailouts, because the reason that the United States Senate under Democrat leadership hasn't passed a budget is because they've been building on this false floor that is based on all of these spending things in the late 2000s. And so, but by not passing a budget, they just get to build on that with continuing resolutions. We need to get back to that as a baseline. Then I think we ask our agencies to come in with reduced budgets. I think 5% is a fine way to do it, and I think every year they ought to come in with reduced budgets until we balance this budget. That's not to say they're all going to live with exactly the same cuts. We did this in the Schaefer administration. I submitted 4 budgets in the 8 years that I was on Ed Schaefer's cabinet. Every budget was lower than the previous budget. And look at the foundation we built for this prosperity that we enjoy today. Budget fiscal discipline is so new to Washington, it would be a culture shock. There's no question about it. But we have a $16 trillion debt. Our grandbaby that was born 2 months ago, Lila, was born with over $50,000 debt to the federal government, and that doesn't even include her part of the unfunded mandates. So fiscal discipline has to be restored at every level.
Ms. Gullickson, comment?
Well, yeah, I don't disagree. But I look at the Paul Ryan budget, a budget I think that my opponent supported. And you look at the approach that budget takes. Deep, deep cuts to really important programs. Education, veterans programs, Farm Bill, sort of across the board things that may help grow this country long term. But what it doesn't do, doesn't ask for any sacrifice from those in this country that have done so very well. What it does instead is it offers an additional $150,000 tax cuts to the very, very wealthy. When are we going to start asking those amongst us who have done so well to help start contributing to resolving this debt, bringing this debt down and helping grow the economy?
This is the kind of class warfare that is very unhealthy in our country today. When you talk about the upper 1%, the very, very wealthy is not paying their fair share, they're paying 40% of the share, that top 1%. And they're the ones that are going to create wealth, create jobs, create the entrepreneurial opportunities. And by the way, many of these subsidies that my opponent talks about go to millionaires. There's a millionaire. Let's cut the millionaire subsidy. Let's say if you're making over $1 million, you don't get a subsidy for your farm. If you're making over $1 million, you don't get a subsidy for your green energy program or any number of other programs that are subsidized by the federal government. Most of the subsidies coming out of the federal government go to wealthy people. Let's start there, and then let's also flatten our tax code. Let's make compliance easier. Let's create fewer loopholes. Then the wealthy are going to pay more. But we're going to provide the certainty that investment needs, and we'll unleash the entrepreneurial spirit in this country, and we'll grow the economy while growing revenue. But let's keep that budget lean.
Any questions?
Well, I have a question. I don't know how he can defend the flat tax. A flat tax is a huge shift to the poor, to the middle class, from the upper levels. It does nothing to bring down and strengthen the middle classes, which is what we have to focus on. And it actually increases the burden on farmers, on a lot of small businesses, because it increases all taxes to that 23% for inputs.
See, what it does is it lowers the tax rate for everybody, and more people are going to pay into it. But the mitigation is the certainty that it creates, because certainty is what the investment community needs. And then guess what? Then we can get back to creating jobs for the middle class, instead of a perpetual welfare state where 47% of the public don't pay any income taxes. I don't apologize for a statement like that. That's unsustainable in a free society. That's not how capitalism works. That's not how our founders designed it. I have faith in our free enterprise system. So I don't have any trouble defending a flatter tax. I think people would welcome filing their taxes on a postcard.
Well, can I respond?
In your next time.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Kramer.
Sure.
Historically, North Dakota has implemented Environmental Protection Agency policies and rules in the state. Recently, the state has found itself in conflict with the EPA on mercury and CO2 emissions for coal-fired power plants and hydraulic fracturing related to oil and gas development. So define the proper role for federal agencies dealing with energy and the environmental issues here in North Dakota?
Well, it ought to be rolled way back. Let me tell you something about our environmental protection in this state. Not only have we implemented EPA regulations, I do it every day in my job, Department of Interior regulations, BLM regulations, the Office of Surface Mining, which we oversee. In fact, we just got a glowing review again this week on our implementation of the Federal Office of Surface Mining, Coal Mining Reclamation laws. The reason we do it so well is because we live here. I resent the fact that some Washington bureaucrat thinks they love my clean air more than I do. I always tell the pipeline companies, I've cited billions of dollars worth of pipelines, gas, oil, CO2 pipelines in this state. You ought to have more to fear from the landowner than you do from the bureaucrat. The proper role of the federal government is to set the standards by legislation, not by bureaucratic mandate, but by legislation by the elected representatives in this country. And then they ought to be a backstop. There ought to be a federal backstop. But by and large, you ought to trust the people that live on the land that is being developed, that has the minerals on it. The reason North Dakota is leading the way in energy development isn't just because we have more coal, more oil, more gas, and frankly more wind than everybody else. It's because it's all on private land, where state regulators and private enterprise and private citizens have more to say about it. This 62% down to 40%, the reason we've lost it is because so much of it is on private land. But that energy on federal land has actually shrunk.
Thank you. Ms. Gullickson.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Historically, North Dakota has implemented the EPA policies and rules in our state. Recently, the state has found itself in conflict with EPA on mercury and CO2 emissions for coal-fired power plants and hydraulic fracturing related to oil and gas development. So define the proper role for federal agencies dealing with energy and the environmental issues here in North Dakota.
Well, it probably won't surprise you as a former state legislator that I really think that we should focus most on how we can use the state to implement these. We have the Clean Air Act, we have the Clean Water Act. Both of those have allowed state agencies to help implement that. We need an EPA that doesn't fight that. We need an EPA that starts working with us on that. We need an EPA that doesn't change the rules in the middle of the stream, as they have on a number, including the coal ash. I think with regards, I think they have overreached. I think this is one area where I'm probably not that far apart from my opponent on it. All of this, if you think about these industries, agriculture, energy, all of this, these are the kind of things that our federal government needs to be working with us on to help support us and be partners with us instead of penalizing. So I support the state's right approach. I understand EPA is going to have some general oversight, but it should not be in the punitive way that they've been doing it. It needs to be in a collaborative way and start working with us.
Thank you.
I have a number of members of the Public Service Commission staff here tonight, and one of the things I always tell them is our job is to help companies comply with the law, not punish them. And that's, by the way, what companies want to do, by and large. Here's the problem. If my opponent were to succeed and Nancy Pelosi were to become Speaker of the House, Henry Waxman becomes the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and all of the progress we've made in this state and other places, frankly, will be lost. See, the regulations that the EPA and the other regulatory agencies are carrying out today are the same ones that were there 10 years ago and 20 years ago, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. It's the zeal of the regulator that needs to be reined in. And so it's important for Congress to step in, use their oversight power, use their appropriation power if they need to, and to make sure that the regulators are carrying out the will of the elected official rather than the agenda of the far left.
Any comments?
Well, believe me, I'll have no problem taking on anyone with regards to EPA or anything else that's good in terms of North Dakota's future and for their business development. That's what I've done before. I testified last fall against EPA and on behalf of the state of North Dakota on the regional haze issue because I knew that they were wrong, they were overreaching. Our state health department was managing that issue very, very well. In fact, we're below the standard. So I'll take him on at any turn. But I do have one question for my opponent. He is a state regulator. It is your job. You uphold regulations on behalf of the people of North Dakota. And in that capacity, you've accepted money from the very interests that you regulate. I think that's wrong. And I think that you have an ethical obligation to explain that to the people of North Dakota and to explain why you're using taxpayer dollars to defend that action.
Let me ask you something. If you're a legislator and you're being sued by some far right-wing extremist group, wouldn't you be glad to have the Attorney General of North Dakota defend? In fact, the Attorney General of the United States of America is defending me in that lawsuit. In fact, there's not a single prosecutor or public lawyer in the country that's not on my side of that issue. We do that because if we didn't protect public officials from frivolous lawsuits from far extreme groups like the ones that are suing the Department of the Interior, no one would run for public office. Let me explain my rationale for accepting those contributions and seeking more of them. Because the basis of a free country, the basis of democracy, is that those of you who are regulated by the people you elect get to elect them. You, the voters, get to elect your leadership. If you're a farmer, you get to donate to and elect the ag commissioner. If you're a teacher, you get to donate to and elect the superintendent of public instruction. And on it goes. That's how democracy is built in this country. We're governed by the consent of the governed. Isn't that great? We ought to applaud it, not apologize for it.
This is a very different thing. I mean, we have to step back here and think about this. This is an action, this is a political action where you've chosen to take money from the very interests that you regulate. This is not brought on by an action specifically of the Public Service Commission. This is your own personal action, accepting those contributions even while many of those interests have cases in front of you. Ethically, that's wrong. None of the people who served in that seat prior to you did that. In fact, they made public statements, said they didn't want to get close to that. They didn't want to cross that line. You always want to make sure that you protect your role as basically a judge in these cases.
Actually,
Thank you.
that's not
The time-
true at
the
all.
time.
That's not
The
true
time.
at all.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. And I'd like to remind you both to keep your eyes once in a while on the timer. Okay, thank you. Ms. Gullison, given that more than half of all U.S. citizens have at least one chronic disease, such as diabetes, heart disease, or cancer, what can the federal government do to support schools, parents, communities to build healthier lifestyles, prevent the development of diseases, and reduce the rising cost of health care?
Well, I'm a licensed nutritionist. I spent a good deal of my public life early on working as a nutritionist. And I think we need to start right there. I think we really need to turn our whole health care upside down. Right now, we focus really on sick care. We only respond when people are in a disease state, when they've already facing a chronic disease. We need to approach it from more wellness, more prevention. We need to help support people as they take more personal responsibility for diet and exercise and a way to change their own lifestyle. That's how that's the only way that we're going to start to really be able to rein in these high costs of health care. And it's the only way that we're going to be able to affect bringing down some of the costs of Medicare and other health care programs that our country manages.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer.
Well, first of all, I'm not a nanny. I reject the nanny state, that somehow we're going to dictate to every parent how they're going to feed their children. I think that's inappropriate. But I will tell you this. We need to stop the perverse incentive there in things like Obamacare, things like traditional health insurance, that has this perverse incentive for people to get ill and go to the doctor as opposed to stay healthy. There's no incentive to stay healthy in our insurance system. This was a failure of the Republican leadership prior to Obamacare, and it's a big-time failure of Obamacare. I think what we need to put health care back into the marketplace. You see, when you want to put price caps, for example, you want to open up borders for medicine and drugs, things like that have been talked about, you squash that free enterprise system again in the United States of America that is the responsible for the most advanced medicines and drugs and treatments in the world. And when you create a one-payer system like Obamacare is aiming at, you're going to squash all of that. I think we ought to have healthcare savings accounts where people get their own money, they invest, they keep it themselves, they use it for their health care. If they don't need it, they get to keep it. And if they make healthy decisions, they actually benefit financially from it, while, of course, providing them the opportunity to buy whatever health care they want, including a comprehensive health care that would provide them in case of a major illness. I believe in the markets, I trust markets, and I trust freedom.
Thank you. Response?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Given that more than half of all U.S. citizens have at least one chronic disease, such as diabetes, heart disease, or cancer, what can the federal government do to support schools, parents, and communities to build healthier lifestyles?
Well, the reality is healthcare costs have been going up double-digit. It's one of the biggest challenges we face. Medical inflation is hurting all of us, and we pay for it. We are all paying for it. When people have to access their health care through emergency rooms, we pay dearly for that. And also, it can be so devastating to families. One incident can change your financial future forever. My neighbor Hal is a perfect example. He was just repairing his furnace one fall day, and the furnace blew up. He ended up with severe medical burns, ended up in St. Paul Ramsey Medical Center for a year and a half. Even while he's in a coma, he went through his $1 million cap on his insurance. He went through all of his retirement, every piece of savings he had, and of course he had lost his house in the fire. He ended up with nothing. One situation, one emergency changed his life forever. I think that's wrong, and I think that's something we can, as a nation, can address, and we need to address. And so this is just a start. We know the health care reform bill isn't perfect at all. There's things in it we need to be fixing, but it's a place to start.
Response?
Well, I would just say, specifically to the point of what we can do, I do think encouraging good, healthy living at the education level is important, starting at preschool and kindergarten. Good nutrition habits, good exercise habits, getting kids involved in activities is very important, and then creating a lifestyle of it and modeling that lifestyle. When we read some of these obesity statistics that are coming out these days from some of the southern states, and ours is not exactly doing great, it is scary, because that does lead to higher costs. But we can bring down medical inflation by putting healthcare into the marketplace, because inflation is greater at everything that's paid for by some sort of a monopoly, especially a government monopoly, and healthcare is probably a prime example of it.
Okay, thank you. The next question? The next question goes to you, Mr. Kramer. Farmers are operating without a farm bill. The U.S. Senate passed a version of the Farm Bill with $23.6 billion in savings. The U.S. House Agricultural Commission has offered a version with savings of $35 billion. However, it has not been brought to the floor for a vote. Much of proposed savings would come from reducing spending on nutrition programs, including school lunch. Do you support the Senate or the House version of the Farm Bill? And what level of spending do you support for federal nutrition programs?
Well, there's certainly things in both of them that I like a lot. I like the emphasis on a crop insurance program, and I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds, of farmers and met with lots of farm groups, and in fact, as recently as last week with a whole bunch of them over a dinner meeting, and they all say the same thing. Give us a good crop insurance program, then get out of our way. The Senate, in their crop insurance program, passed a conservation compliance requirement for participating in the federal crop insurance program. It's something we haven't had since 1996, and it's something that literally every farmer and every farm group I've talked to rejects. Farmers in North Dakota know how to farm. They just need that safety net. Just today, we announced that the Public Service Commission, another, 18.6 million bushels of storage capacity in grain elevators. That doesn't even count all of the storage capacity that farmers have built on their own farms. Today's farmers are very savvy. In fact, many of the wheat farmers I've talked to who had a record crop this year still have last year's crop in the bins. They're getting ready for the price to go up even higher. They watch the weather in Brazil and the prices in Argentina, and they know how to market their own products. So they don't want that heavy hand of government. So we've got to pass, I think, a hybrid of the two, get rid of that conservation compliance. We need an insurance program that helps farmers be successful, but it shouldn't require them to be wealthy if they have a tough year, but we need to keep them on the farm, because the family farm is not only the backbone of producing food for a hungry world, but it's the moral background of the central part of this country, including North Dakota.
Thank you. Ms. Gullison, would you like me to repeat the question?
I think I've got it.
Okay.
I'm a farm and rancher, so this one is near and dear to my heart. It's what I work on every day. But, you know, when we saw what just played out with regards to the federal farm bill in Congress, it just really depicts everything that's wrong with Congress. Here you had a bill that passed out of the Senate in a bipartisan way, I said, led by our two senators here, Conrad and Hoeven. They crafted a good bill, a responsible bill. It's not a perfect bill. I also disagree with the conservation compliance issues in there, tying it in there. That needs to be removed. We move over to the House side. Chairman Lucas, Ranking Member Peterson put together a pretty good bill, has deeper cuts, but it's a solid bill. It's got the main things in there. Crop insurance plan, safety net, disaster aid. Those are the critical, important piece that our farmers, our bankers, our Main Street businesses, our implement dealers will all tell you they want in a farm bill. And then it all stops. It all just stops because it's derailed by these extreme groups. Club for Growth, who's given my opponent over $100 million in this race, or $100,000 in this race, $100,000, I'll correct that.
No wonder.
In this race. And they said it's a key vote. They want to kill the Farm Bill, and they've held up their members and the people they've endorsed to make sure that they hold that position. That's wrong. We need a Farm Bill to come together for this state, for our farmers, for their certainty.
Mr. Kramer.
First of all, the Club for Growth has bundled about $50,000 for my campaign, but what's $50,000 in today's campaigns anymore? Part of why the Farm Bill hasn't passed is also because urban liberals don't like that cut in the food stamp and nutrition programs that you spoke of. Since Barack Obama became president, the food stamp program has doubled. 45 million people today are on food stamps. The House version, those extra cuts, simply require people to qualify for food stamps, to have to apply for them. And with that, they'll save, guess what? 2%. That's what that cut represents, 2% to the nutrition programs. Ladies and gentlemen, have I mentioned we have a $16 trillion debt? Our children are being born owing over $50,000 to the federal government, or frankly, to other countries. We can't sustain that. I think a modest 2% in food stamp program, providing an incentive for people to go work and apply for programs as opposed to simply just be entitled to them, seems like a reasonable thing to me.
Response?
Well, right now, across the state, the combines are rolling. People are taking in their harvest. Farmers are working early in the morning till late at night, and they won't quit until the job's done. I mean, Congress could learn a lot from that. That's what we fail here. The fact that we can't even get the bill to conference committee so that we can resolve these differences. There are some differences over the nutrition title. And this is nutrition that includes not just food stamps, but of course senior citizen programs, school lunch programs, a lot of the things that most of us really support. But the middle ground is going to be found here. I don't think either side is exactly right on that. We'll find that part that we can agree on with regards to the nutrition title and move forward. But that's what we've got to do. And you don't step away from the table. You don't quit before the job is done. You stay there until you resolve these problems.
Thank you. Next question is for you, Ms. Gullison. Did either of you have anything more to ask or answer?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. What specifically would you recommend to strengthen and preserve Social Security and Medicare for current and future generations?
Well, these are two such incredibly important programs. As I've traveled around the state of North Dakota and talked to seniors, they will tell you that they've been some of the most important programs in their life. So with regards to Social Security, we've got to grow the economy. We've got to get more people contributing to the system. That's how we're going to help strengthen that fund. And we've got to stop raiding the Social Security Trust Fund. Allow that money to stay there and focus on working for seniors. I don't support privatization. That's the position that my opponent has supported. That's not where I think we should go. Medicare costs, it all is tied to medical inflation, healthcare costs going up. We've got to start reining in overall medical costs in order to sustain Medicare long term. We've got to keep people out of the hospital. It's the #1 high-cost center of Medicare. And in order to do that, we're going to have to make sure that we focus a lot more on preventative ed, early testing, the kind of things that help keep our seniors out of there. And again, I don't support the voucher program. I think that's a program that's been suggested by my opponent and Paul Ryan and so many others. I think it's not time to give up on such a strong, strong program. I think instead we focus on how we can help solve some of these problems and sustain it long term.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer?
Well, the two programs, Social Security and Medicare, are somewhat similar, but they're also quite different. With regard to Medicare, the Medicare trustees have stated that Medicare will be bankrupt in 2024. Stick your head in the sand and do nothing, which is what the Democrat leadership in Congress has done, is fine if you're going to die within the next 12 years. But if you plan to live 13, you're going to have to cut your benefits 24% just to keep it solvent. So we have to do something. I think we should draw a line. Maybe it's Paul Ryan's line at 55, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 52. I think that reasonable people can come together and draw that line and say that for everybody at this line or higher, we're not going to change the program. You don't have to worry. It's exactly as you know it today. Then we don't create this generational warfare that the Democrats love to use to divide people. We need to come together as a country. Then let's provide alternatives below the line of 55 or 52, 50. Maybe it's a premium support, maybe it's choices. I think choice works. That's how you bring down costs. What if we gave everybody premium support at a certain level, and let's say it's the exact level of Medicare. If you want to stay on Medicare as it is, you get to do that. That's what Barack Obama promised with Obamacare. He hasn't delivered it, but that's what he promised. But let's make that promise to everybody. But if you can find something a little less expensive that suits your needs, why don't you use that for that and keep the rest? If you want something that's a little bit more expensive, then you pay the difference. You know, I'm not afraid of choice. I don't support a voucher system, but I want to give people choices, because when you give people choices, guess what? The market responds appropriately.
Well, we know the history of Medicare. We have Medicare because the health insurance companies didn't want to insure our senior citizens. They dropped them off the plans. This is the plans. This is a high cost, a group of people to insure. They were not racing. They weren't competing for this group. And so opening it up to vouchers, allowing health insurance, again, the option of agreeing to cover or not cover our seniors is just too risky. That's not where I would go. On Social Security, I know a lot of people are very interested in privatization. I think that your code words for options are that. But what we've seen just in the last number of years, look what happened to retirement plans. I know in situations, the Bobcat workers in my district tell me they lost 30 to 40% of the value of their 401k plans just because of this recession. That's too risky. We can't do that with our seniors' retirement plans. It's great to incentivize savings. We should all have other retirement plans as well, but we need to protect Social Security so that our seniors have real economic security long term.
If I might, I also support means testing for Social Security. I think there are people at a certain level of means that don't require the whole thing. I think that it's appropriate for wealthier people perhaps not to get the same amount or the same percentage as somebody else. I think that's plenty appropriate. I think we do need to grow the pie. I think we can raise the age just a little bit more, maybe a month a year for a while, only for people under my line, remember. We're not talking about seniors, I'm talking about younger people that aren't yet approaching. And by the way, for those of you, for those that would suggest that somehow the stock market or private investment is so risky, do I need to remind you, we have a $16 trillion federal debt. Do you really trust the federal government's investments versus, say, somebody else?
My only response there is you draw that line at 55. Remember, someone who's 54 has been paying in to the system for a long time. This is our system. We contribute to it. This is not an entitlement. So they've already been contributing a long time. I disagree with that. I also disagree with raising the age. The age is set to go up to 67 over the next 15 years. I think that's an adequate age. If we were going to look at any additional things, I would look at the cap. I would look at raising the cap by which we all contribute. I think that's one of the areas that we can find more revenue for the system as well.
Quick question for both of you. The cap you mentioned is now at $110,000. So anyone making over $110,000 no longer pays into Social Security.
That's right.
Opinions on that from either of you? Where would it be?
Yeah, again, and that's an area that I think we should be discussing. I think we could either raise the cap or remove it completely. I think we should be contributing longer.
And I think we could be working longer. I'd rather see people being productive for another half a year of their life. 67, I got news for you, especially 15 years from now. I plan to be very productive at the age of 67. I'm not surprised my opponent wants to raise the cap. She voted for 9 tax increases when she was in the legislature. I'm not surprised she wants to continue to do that. But that's not the challenge for Social Security isn't more revenue. I think that we can deal with it on the other side. If we grew it by 1 month a year beyond 67, you know, starting, and by the way, remember my line, 55, 53, 52, whatever we decide. It's a choice under that. If you want the old Medicare program, you can have that. That's one of the choices.
Thank you. And back to you, Mr. Kramer. North Dakota leaders are in near consensus on the need for a national energy policy. Do you agree? If so, what should it include relative to oil, including refining and pipelines, coal and wind energy?
Well, thank you for the question, and yes, I understand that they're nearly in consensus, and I think it's a wonderful thing to say that we need a national energy policy. Let me tell you what I think it ought to be. It doesn't need to be nearly as complicated as a lot of people say it is. What it needs to be is, what they need is certainty in environmental regulation. National energy policy ought to be driven not by the federal government, it ought to be driven by the consumer. The consumer ought to be able to choose what kind of a car they drive, for example. They ought to be able to choose the fuel of their choice. They ought to be able to choose collectively how they want their electricity generated. You know, I regulate utilities for a living. Utilities don't mind any type of generation as long as I guarantee that they get to recover the costs from the ratepayer. But I say, wait a minute, before you decide to use that more expensive fuel, let's consider a less expensive fuel on behalf of the ratepayer. I think consumer choice ought to drive energy policy in this country, not perverse incentives. See, I'm interested in this idea that somehow we've created certainty for the oil industry. I'd like to know what those tax breaks are for the oil industry that people speak of as though they're equivalent to some sort of a subsidy. Allowing them to deduct their expenses for example, intangible drilling costs, is just allowing them to deduct their expenses. It's not a subsidy.
Thank you. Ms. Gullison.
Well, I absolutely agree that we need, you know, to do more of what we're doing here in this great state. We are an energy production model for the nation, and we should be doing more of it. What we're doing right now, of course, with oil production is tantamount to nothing that we've ever seen before. And I think nobody even anticipated. We certainly didn't 30 years ago, we didn't 20 years ago. What's made a big difference there, of course, is advanced research and development. You know, much of that has been funded through government support. We see there's 2 companies right now that have just are part of the Red River Valley Research Corridor. These companies have developed innovative sensors and RFID technology that's really helping to drill down and help find that oil to a certainty. So there's lots of good things there. We need to support our coal industry. This has been such an important part of this state. And again, rein in EPA, which I do think is overreach. We need to support that industry. This is something we can do, but we should not ever let go of the fact that we have so much more in North Dakota. We have all the capacity. We grow the grains for renewables and bios. We are the Saudi Arabia of wind. We should not be giving up on that. All of that is so good for this country, and so we need to continue to support it.
Do either of you have more to say on that?
You know, I might just say, I don't suggest we should give up on anything. What I'm saying is we ought to have a level playing field for everything. And then allow the consumer to decide by their choices which of the sources they want. We have an 800-year supply of lignite coal under the prairies of North Dakota. We're number 2 in the country in production of oil. We're number 6 in the country in exporting electricity, largely by burning coal. We are one of only 4 states that generates more than 10% of our own electricity using renewable sources, without a mandate, I might add. All the while we meet all ambient air quality standards as prescribed by the EPA. I know what we ought to do with America's national energy. What we ought to do with America's national energy policy is turn it over to North Dakota and let us run all 50 states, and we'll be booming again in this country.
Well, my response to this is every one of these areas of energy production has received some support from this government. That's not a bad thing. It means we invest in ourselves. It again, reminds us that our goal is independence. And so the only way we do that is by strengthening everything. And my opponent is giving up on the wind industry. He has said time and time again he won't support the production tax credit. It's the one area of certainty for that industry, while all the while supporting all of the other certainty for the other areas of energy. So that's where we really disagree.
Okay, thank you. All right, the eighth question. Flood disasters in North Dakota on the Souris, Missouri, and Red Rivers have raised questions about the role and effectiveness of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. What action should Congress take? What action should Congress take to make the Corps more responsive to legitimate needs of communities in North Dakota?
Is it mine?
It is.
Well, you know, in my capacity of working with Senator Dorgan, I worked with the Army Corps of Engineers a great deal on Devil's Lake, on Fargo flood fights, certainly Grand Fork recovery long-term, Wahpeton. And I was here on the ground as we watched what happened with the Missouri River and in Minot with the Souris River, and the debacle. And in my view, how the Army Corps of Engineers totally dropped the ball on that issue. There was no transparency. They did not show a plan. They didn't have the kind of solutions that we needed to help protect those two cities. That's really wrong. We need to hold them accountable for that. And I don't think they've ever really explained what happened there. And so I think the way you do it is, you know, one of my favorite things I used to do with my dad was go with him to the blacksmith. And you know, if you watch a blacksmith, they take heavy pieces of steel and they apply heat, and they apply heat, and they bend that steel until you get what you want, the kind of action that you want. And that's what we need to do with the Corps. They need to respond to us. And I think one of the first things you do is you do it through their budget. That's how you get their attention. That's what brings the generals and their personnel in the door to talk to you and gets their attention. And I know right now, this unbelievable idea that they're going to sell us our water from the Missouri River, that's just wrong. There's no way. We'll use every legal action to fight that.
That is time. Mr. Kramer.
Well, I love the illustration of bending them like steel. I'd just as soon break them, quite honestly. I think the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been one of the most egregious, overreaching federal agencies, and just like the EPA and the other agencies I've talked about, more of it ought to be turned over to the states. Let me tell you what I believe about the Missouri River system, and I believe it about those reservoirs at Sakakawea and down here south of us as well, that is part of the river. That's our water. So my question is this. My question, as much as anything, is for the state government. Why do we go to their hearings instead of demanding they come to our hearings? That's our water. I think we ought to put our pipes in that water and take it out of there and force them to tell us we can't do it, as opposed to us having to go and get permission from them. That's our water. The Constitution of the United States says it's ours. The laws of the country say it's ours. If we're confident of our position, our legal position to litigate, as my opponent suggests, and I agree that we should use every legal means possible, but I think we ought to start demanding a little more from the Corps rather than just keep showing up year after year after year and sort of wringing our hands. And I agree. Well, let's use the appropriation process if that's what we have to do. But we ought to rein them in just like we rein every other regulatory agency in its time. And not only that, but we'll save in our budget as well. Because if I hadn't mentioned, we have a $16 trillion debt.
Mm-hmm. Is there any questions for either of you or on the other side?
I think we're in pretty close agreement on this one.
You've been in agreement on a couple of things. I wish I could ask more questions. We only have a few minutes left, though. So,
oh, darn.
Yeah, I know. So thank you very much for being here tonight, both of you, and answering the questions that we did get to tonight. And you now each have 2 minutes to provide a closing comment.
All right. And I get to go first again?
Yes, you do.
Okay, thank you, Inessa. Thanks
Yeah.
again for
Yeah.
lending your talents to this. You did a great job, and you did a pretty reasonable job of keeping us on time. You did your part. We weren't always so cooperative. But you know what, you guys? That's the beauty of democracy. And I know that we need to have a ruly crowd and all of those things, and there's something nice about that. But there's also something about rigorous debate and discussion that ends with us disagreeing on some things, but we still get to shake hands. We still serve the same God, the same state, the same country, with the same, hopefully, goals to improve our country. So thanks to you and to everybody for being here in the League of Women Voters, and those of you that take the time to watch this on television at some point, whether, if not tonight, whenever it runs. And just thanks for the opportunity to serve. You know, I've had the grand opportunity these last 9 years to be your Public Service Commissioner, overseeing this, what I say is the most dynamic energy economy in the country, where we do manage these resources in a responsible way. It's our charge to ensure that there is good growth that is done in a responsible manner, that is uses efficient use of the resources, that preserves the cultural and natural resources and the well-being of our citizens. It's been a great honor to do that. And I believe that the United States of America has never needed what North Dakota has to offer more than today, with regard to fiscal restraint, with regard to limited government, with regard to growing an economy, with regard to moral standards, with regard to care for our seniors as well as our children. Every generation deserves our care. But ladies and gentlemen, one thing you'll probably learn from me if you haven't yet, is that above all else, America is a free nation still. And of all of the blessings of this great country, whether it's peace, prosperity, safety, all of it's for nothing if we don't remain free. And so I'm committed to that as your congressman. I ask for your vote and your support on November 6th. I look forward to many more of these debates and forums with my opponent, who's been gracious enough to do it with me.
Yeah.
Ms. Gullison.
Well, thanks again to everybody here. The great audience, a good program, some tough but compelling questions, and to my opponent for being part of it here. You know, North Dakota has one seat in Congress. We have one voice. It has to be a strong voice. It has to be someone who stands up and fights for North Dakota, who takes on the special interests, who takes on the Club for Gross, the Tea Party, who doesn't sign the Grover Norquist pledge, who will only take one pledge, and it's to the people of this great state. And I believe that's me. That's the service that I've always brought to this state. I served for 16 years in the state legislature and worked very, very hard to represent not only my district, but the entire state. And it was a blessing and something I enjoyed greatly. But I took it, obviously, with a tremendous amount of responsibility, because I know that that's what comes with being an elected official. And so I stand in front of you today, again, to offer my service to this country, because I think I have what it takes to help bring that voice, bring that common sense, be very committed to start working together across the aisle and really working for America and getting ready to solve these big, big challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thank you both for being here tonight. I also wish to thank... I also wish to thank Dakota Media Access, the Bismarck Tribune, and the volunteers from the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. Thank you, the viewers at home, and the audience members here tonight for taking the time to learn more about the candidates and our issues. This program will replay several times on Government Access Cable Channel 2 and will be available for online viewing at www.freetv.org in the days leading up to the November 6th election. Before we close this candidate forum, I want to remind you that voting information can be found through your county auditor's office. Thank you and good night.
Yeah, good job. Good job.
If you enjoyed this program, would like to see it again, or send the link to your friends, it's available at freetv.org. www.ccc.org.